Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through one of the most fascinating and frankly urgent developments happening in the tech world today. We are looking at India's newly proposed private sector AI rulebook. It's a massive, ambitious framework designed to essentially tame the wild west of artificial intelligence, bringing some much-needed structure, safety, and accountability to the algorithms that are literally reshaping our lives.
Okay, let's dive into this because this right here is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? If an AI system denies someone a loan or hallucinates a legal precedent or, worst case scenario, causes actual physical harm, who takes the fall? You can't exactly throw a piece of code in jail, right? You can't fire an algorithm. The core problem the tech industry is grappling with right now is this glaring lack of clear accountability. And this massive, complex puzzle is exactly what the Artificial Intelligence Governance Standard of India, or AIGSI, is attempting to solve. Here is how we're going to break this down today. First, the catalyst. Then, the new standard, the 12 principles, deployers versus developers, and finally, we'll look at how it's a living standard. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1. The catalyst, and exactly why AIGSI is so necessary right now.
The evolution here happened incredibly fast. It started with the foundation of data protection professionals in India, FDPPI for short. Initially, they had built frameworks purely for data protection compliance, specifically targeting India's data privacy law, the DPDPA. Then, as AI adoption just exploded, they introduced an extension called DGPSI AI to cover organizations processing personal data through AI. But then, the regulatory landscape completely shifted. The Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, dropped strict new model risk management and data governance frameworks. Right at the same time, CERDIN, India's nodal cybersecurity agency, issued its own AI framework for risk management. Basic data protection laws just weren't cutting it anymore. The regulatory pressure from these heavy hitters made it absolutely crucial to shift toward a dedicated, comprehensive AI governance standard.
So that regulatory agitation brings us to Chapter 2, the new standard, introducing AIGSI. Enter AIGSI, the Artificial Intelligence Governance Standard of India. This is a highly comprehensive framework currently being explored and developed by FDPPI. Now, the absolute key point you need to take away here is that this is not a government mandate. It's not a hard law, at least not yet. This is designed by the private sector in India as a best practice guideline for the industry. It's essentially the industry stepping up to self-regulate, setting a high bar for data governance themselves before formal, rigid legislation comes in and forces their hand.
Which leads us to Chapter 3, the 12 principles. These are the core AI guidelines. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is how it lays out the foundational commandments of the framework. We can group these first few under the theme of human oversight. AIGSI insists that behind every single algorithm, there must be a human handler. There has to be an identifiable person who takes the fall or gets the credit for the AI's outcomes. Also, you can't just use AI because it's the trendy new thing. Its use has to be fully justified technically and economically before it ever touches a user's data. There's also this massive mandate for a fiduciary responsibility to safeguard society at large, not just individual users. And maybe most importantly, there has to be a built-in kill switch. The framework explicitly demands human-in-command override mechanisms to stop things like automation bias or decision fatigue. At the end of the day, the AI is just the tool, but the human is the boss. The framework also aggressively tackles transparency and safety with concepts like explainability by design. This means every privacy notice covering an AI process has to include an explainability disclosure. If your AI makes a high-impact decision, you have to be able to explain exactly how it arrived at that conclusion. If it's just a total black box, well, then compensating controls have to apply. Furthermore, the standard explicitly demands guardrails against dark patterns. This means actively securing the AI against neurological manipulation or any physical or psychological harm to the data principle. It's a very real acknowledgement of how deeply persuasive and potentially manipulative these AI systems can be. Let's run through the remaining principles, which pivot heavily toward risk and security. Under AIGSI, if you don't know the risk of your AI system, you must automatically treat it as a significant, high risk that requires enhanced governance. Governance itself is tiered, so more complex models require much heavier monitoring. All models need independent validation by a team that didn't build it and doesn't profit from it. Systems have to be built with a secure development lifecycle. And if something goes wrong, you need timely, transparent disclosure to regulators like CERDIN or the RBI. You don't get to wait around for a postmortem. Finally, AI governance isn't just a one-time stamp of approval. It requires continuous, full lifecycle governance from the initial development all the way to decommissioning.
All right, moving on to Chapter 4, Deployers versus Developers, because the rules aren't identical for everyone. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the key innovations of AIGSI, dual-layered accountability. On the left side, we have the deployer. This is the bank, the hospital, or the retailer who buys an AI model and puts it to use on their customers. On the right side, you have the developer. This is the tech company, the engineers who actually wrote the code and supplied the model. The framework recognizes a very practical reality. You just can't hold the organization who bought the software to the exact same technical standards as the engineers who coded it, but they absolutely must share responsibility. So, to enforce this shared responsibility, the framework lays out exactly 61 specific implementation controls. It's a huge checklist, but it's divided almost perfectly down the middle. 30 of these controls apply strictly to the deployers, and 31 apply to the developers. When you look at this breakdown, you can really see how perfectly tailored the expectations are. The 6 clusters for the deployer are heavily focused on oversight. They're handling governance, risk assessment, and vendor due diligence, meaning they have to thoroughly vet the developers they're buying from. They also handle deployment controls, monitoring, and audit documentation. Now look over at the 7 developer clusters. Their job is highly technical. They are the ones responsible for testing, secure development, patching vulnerabilities, credential management, and building actual safety controls into the deliverables. It's like a beautifully structured handshake between the makers of the AI and the users of the AI. Finally, Chapter 5, A Living Standard, Adapting to the Future. I want to highlight this exact quote from the source material because it's so important. It says, "As and when a specific law emerges in this sector, the framework will be suitably fine-tuned." This is vital to understand. AI is not static, it's changing every single day. Therefore, this standard cannot be static. AIGSI is very much a living, breathing document. It is acting as a robust placeholder, setting a high industry standard today, knowing full well that when the Indian government eventually passes formal, binding AI legislation, this framework will just adapt and align with it. It's all about being proactive rather than reactive. Which leaves us with this final thought. The regulatory pressure from massive entities like the RBI and CERT-In is already here. The private sector is already drawing up the blueprints for accountability, explainability, and risk management through standards like AIGSI. The Wild West era of AI deployment, it's coming to a close. So, whether you are developing algorithms or just deploying them for your customers, as AI rapidly evolves, are your organization's guardrails ready? Because the standard for accountability is being set right now.